Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This will be a review of the Leatherman Free P4 multi-tool. We'll talk over some of the basics of the tool before we go into actually opening every single portion and talk through all of the 21 different tools that it claims to have. It's one of the nicer multi-tools I've ever owned. To spend a little bit more on this than I typically spend. One of the cool features is that it's single-handed opening, which is convenient if your other hand is busy holding something else. Part of what allows it to have the single-handed opening is because it's magnetic architecture, so just like the closing clasp is magnetically held together. So then just with your free hand, you can open it. Obviously, more practice it'll come smoother, but single-handed use, it's a little different than even other Leatherman, like the Skeletal. Definitely it takes two hands to open, two hands to not necessarily operate, but you have to actually positively push it open. It is not free to swing like this tool is, so that's part of what you're paying for, is just the magnet and the smooth operation. Obviously this Skeletal is, in comparison, a little bit harder to close than this is, with just single-handed. Almost just let gravity close it. Another cool aspect is a lot of tools that you guys might be familiar with require like a fingernail to get to the tools. For example, like this SOG multi-tool, after opening the tool and pulling off this little guard, then you have to use a fingernail to get the tools out. So there's definitely pros and cons to this design, where with the tool completely closed you can get to the tools. Also, you don't have to use a fingernail. Everything is a big, large, easily accessible tab where you can just use the end of your thumb or whatever finger to pry it open. You don't have to risk breaking fingernails even to get to the tools that are in the inner portion of the tool itself. You just push with your thumb, and then from there you can select from which tool you want. The positive lock that actually allows them to stay engaged and not accidentally collapse on your fingers is well designed too. You can see from here that when you push these tabs open, it pulls this little lock, and because of the clearance between them being angled away from each other, you can have the tool completely closed and the tools can completely extend and engage. And then as far as unlocking the tool, it would be probably pretty difficult to accidentally, if you're using the tool in this direction, pushing against it, it'd be hard to pull back the opposite direction for that it to become disengaged. But once again, easy to disengage the tools with the push tab. Tool also has a pocket clip, so if you'd prefer to use that as how to store your tool, whether it's on your belt or in a pocket. Also included in the box is a nylon sheath, which is obviously appropriately sized for the tool, and then you can loop that through your belt loop if you want. So like I said at the beginning of the video, it claims to have 21 total tools on here. It weighs 8.6 ounces. Closed length is 4 inches, 4¼ inches, and the blade length is 2.76 inches. With that, we'll go on to the individual tools. So before we even get into any of these tools, obviously comparing a multi-tool to full-size tools is not nearly as easy to use, but if the goal is to have a bunch, as many as 21 tools in your pocket in one item's form factor, then obviously it's hard to beat. For the tools themselves, the first thing that it offers is needle nose pliers. As you can tell from just a normal set of needle nose pliers, very similar form factor. Both from the side and from the front, so you can get a pretty similar amount of leverage. It's not going to be as much as like the multiplication you get on something like this, where it's a geared ratio. So even though it's maybe relatively short handles compared to something like lineman's pliers, you can get still a little bit more leverage out of something like that compared to that, where it's just straight up grip strength instead of a gear ratio. In addition to needle nose pliers, further down the tip, kind of similar to what needle nose pliers do anyways, but it extends a little bit further down. However, You do get more of a normal cut, more similar to normal pliers than you do on needle nose pliers. Typically the bottom end of needle nose pliers has just a wire cutter, a little cutout, so potential for grabbing cylindrical objects with that portion of the lower end of the pliers themselves. The wire cutter portion is replaceable. You can tell from the little screws that are recessed in there on each side. You can replace the blades if you use this tool so much that they wear out. There's also a wire cutter at the front end, and at the back end there's a heavy duty hard wire cutter with a little bit different cut shape and a little bit bigger gap between the blades, so that you're not having the wire slide up the tool as you're trying to cut something that's hard to get through. A lot of multi-tools have the wire crimper down here at the bottom. That's for things like this. Obviously smaller gauge stuff on a tool like this. It doesn't give you as much flexibility as a tool like that, where there's all sorts of different size wire crimpers down at the bottom end of the tool, but at least it's better than nothing. You can tell from try to show you up close, but there's a small little rounded shape with a vertical piece, so you can more precisely place the crimp. There's a decent amount of clearance between the tool and the actual crimping portion. Not nearly as much clearance as something like this, where all it is flat steel in order to crimp whatever object you're trying to crimp, but it seems like it would be enough clearance to give you a useful crimp on whatever electrical connection you're trying to make. Beyond the wire cutters and an electrical crimper that kind of simulate a lot of the capability of a set of wire strippers like this, wire cutters, and it goes on to the knife. There's two different knives. One is just a straight knife with a modified drop point, and the other one is more of like a tanto point. One's serrated and one's not. They're both 420 HC steel. For the composition of 420 HC steel, it's 0.5% carbon, 13% chromium, 0.5% manganese, 0.3% vanadium, and 0.4% silicone. So for that percentage of carbon, improves the hardness and the wear and corrosion resistance, but keeps from using too much of it, which would then decrease the strength. The 13% chromium gives you tensile strength and edge retention, also enhances the corrosion resistance, and that's what affords you the rating of stainless steel by the amount of chromium in the composition. The manganese included on the composition increases the hardness, but also increases the brittleness, so that's only 0.4%. Vanadium improves the wear resistance and hardenability, and then the silicone improves the strength. I don't know a ton about knives, but from a lot of the reviews I've read about specifically this composition of knife blades, seems like it has decent edge retention. Since it's more than 12% chromium, then it gives you the, like I said, it gives you the rating of being considered a stainless steel, which gives you excellent corrosion resistance. Due to the composition including carbon and vanadium, the 420 HC steel offers great wear resistance. Not the best, but still pretty good wear resistance. As far as sharpness and machinability, it's easy to form, easy to sharpen, and it's great for machining. And lastly, it is a tough steel due to the composition including silicone and chromium. It's a fairly low-end stainless steel, but it's still great steel overall for an affordable knife, especially if both blades are made of the same components. I can't think of many cases where I would rather have a serrated knife over a regular straight bladed knife. It's also harder to sharpen a serrated knife. So you can just make the argument that having two different knives with different profiles, different points, the same composition just gives you a primary and a backup, or if something would be easier to cut or get to with one of the tips over the other, then you have that flexibility. After the knives, now that we've talked over the two knives that are on the Leatherman Free P4 and go on to the scissors. The scissors kind of cool. It's obviously not nearly as useful or as much leverage as a full-size pair of scissors, but it does give you a little bit more controllability over cutting things like paper or whatever. It is spring assisted, which is nice, and it's not annoying because you can tell from the way that the action works. Spring-loaded scissors, but as soon as you disengage that portion of the tool, it disengages the spring, so you're not fighting the spring to reload the scissors back in the tool. A lot of times the scissors included on a multi-tool will be pushing back, like on a lot of Swiss Army knives, the scissors will be pushing back on the tool as you're trying to stow the tool, which potentially could result in you not fully resetting the tool. More likely it's just kind of annoying to deal with and a little bit less streamlined. And the last thing that I thought was kind of cool is that the spring itself is what allows you to grab. It's the touch point for pulling the tool out. After the scissors, we go on to the saw. This is fairly well designed too. You can tell that it's a pretty aggressive set of teeth for such a small little saw. It's also designed to cut on the pull stroke so that if this tool were to slip, then your hand is much less likely to slide forward and cut yourself. So it's not going to work as well as an actual saw, but in comparison you can see that the blade, like the depth of the teeth, is very similar to something that you'd find on a tool like this. It's not as aggressive as something that's designed to just cut a lot of wood very quickly. So something like this SOG wood saw has massive teeth, which this can't compete against something like that, but for what it is, works decently well. Should I show you a quick example of how well it cuts? This with the saw blade. So as you can see, it works decently, especially with how short the blade is. And then, like I said, because of the way that the teeth are cut, it's designed to be less dangerous using such a small tool, especially if you have sweaty hands like I do. If I could get the camera to focus, show you what I mean. So because the teeth are angled backwards, it's a lot easier to push the tool through whatever you're cutting. If you pull, that's when it actually starts cutting and pulling out fairly large little pieces of sawdust. There's very little cutting that happens on the push stroke. It's a little bit different than a saw like this, where most of the cutting is done on the push stroke because you can get a lot more force out of pushing against the saw. Obviously way more surface area, but this is way safer to use because of the handle, and you're not going to push yourself into slipping on the tool and then cutting your hand directly on the blades. So we'll put all this away and we'll talk about the next portion of the tool. Now that we've gotten through all four of the main large full-size tools that are on each of the outside edges of both arms of the handle, go on to the center portion. So the first tool I'll talk about is the wood and metal file. This is not the most useful. There is a wood side and a metal side. You could sharpen tools or file down wood. It's kind of gimmicky, just like on a lot of multi-tools. The file that they include is so much smaller than something that you might actually want to use that has a decent amount of surface area to it, especially if it has a curved end. That's not going to be able to fit on something like this, but it's at least somewhat useful. Included on the end of that is what they're referring to as the medium-sized flat tip screwdriver head. The screwdriver stuff, obviously, it's not nearly as easy to use as an actual screwdriver would be. Stuff like this where it has the adjustable and different size tips. These store a lot more compact than 4 separate screwdrivers would. And like I said, this is not as comfortable as this is, but it's better than nothing. The next tool after the file is the awl. So this is the awl right here. It's similar to something like this. It's like just a little straight pick. You can use it for scratching things or getting into tight places. This one also does have a kind of sharpened edge down here that you could use to scrape things. And then the smallest flathead screwdriver bit is on the end of the awl. So that's kind of a dual purpose item right there. After that, both of the items on this tool, on this portion of the tool, are kind of gimmicky. The little ruler is so small. It is better than nothing, but not the most useful. This is the largest of the 3 included flathead screwdriver heads. And then down here, they're claiming this is a wire stripper. It does work, and from having messed with it a little bit, it seems more like it does a better job of just like shaving wires as opposed to actually stripping wires. It's nowhere near as easy to use as something like this, where there's actual sizes that correlate with a different gauge of smaller wire, but it does eventually get the job done if you know how to use it. It's cut at an angle, so you just hold the wire, and with obviously more force you can get more material off. But it does slowly take the shielding off of wire like that. Because of the size, you're pretty limited on what gauge wire you can use. If it doesn't fit in here, you're not going to be able to strip wire, so this wire is a tiny bit bigger gauge, and it's just grabbing too far onto the shoulder of each end of the tool, and you can tell from here you're not going to be able to actually strip much off of that unless you're really fighting the tool. Once you strip enough of it off, then it'll get a little smaller, and then it won't create as much friction on either side of the tool. Better than nothing, but not the most useful. And then the last tool on this end is the can opener. Not a whole lot to this. It's much more similarly designed to this end of a can opener, not this end. This is not as really easy to use as this would be for cutting the entire lid off of a can. But you can get into a can with the can opener. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. With that, segue onto the bottle opener on the other side. Bottle opener correlates with this bottle opener. Nothing fancy there. This tool doubles as the single Phillips bit screwdriver. It's not the most symmetrical. You can see it's a little bit more flat than symmetrical, but it is better at removing or fastening Phillips screw heads than trying to force a flat head to work. And then the last tool on here is what they're referring to as both the pry bar and the box opener. Technically you could use any of the knives or even the sharpened side of that awl to cut through the cardboard or packaging tape on a box. So this isn't really that impressive. It is a lot thicker steel than everything on this side. You can see from, if this can focus, all 4 of the tools on the one side of the arm are a little bit thinner, so then the other tools, the 2 tools down the center of this tool are a lot thicker, which gives you reasonably, I guess you could say, that this is more likely to avoid damage if you are to use it to pry something open, like a paint can lid or something like that. Some of this stuff is a little bit redundant. Technically, I guess you could say that it does really do have 21 tools on it. So I'll go back real quick through what they're calling 21 tools. So first, needle nose plier at the end, regular plier down further down the tool. Then wire cutters and hard wire cutters down at the bottom with replaceable blades, wire crimper. And then back on the outside of the handles, got both knives on this side, the saw and the scissors. And then down this side of the center, 3 different sized flathead screwdriver tips. You have the wood metal file, the awl, the can opener, the ruler, and the wire stripper. On this side, the 2 thicker tools that take the place of the 4 on this side are the pry tool, the box opener, and the Phillips screwdriver tip. The last thing that they call a feature, they don't call it a tool, but the little pocket clip on the end. Obviously with tools like this, you get what you pay for. One of the big selling features of this tool specifically is that magnetic closing, so it's easy, effortless closing, fairly positive lock. It would be hard to open it on accident unless you actually push through the magnet and open it, obviously showing you that it is possible to open it one-handed. There might be cases where you only have access to one hand and you need something that is open one-handed. In reality, I think it's just easier and more of a joy to use this tool if you're not constantly pulling against it to get it to open and pushing real hard against it to close like most multi-tools do. Some are worse than others. Obviously, the more that you use it, the more it will soften up. Something like this, it's brand new. I haven't even used this skeletal yet. It's all real tight and constantly pushing against the springs. Eventually this will wear in, but for now it's kind of notchy. If you guys have any questions on this tool, the Leatherman Free P4, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.